Remember last year's amazing trip? That cute first birthday party? All those photos, all those memories can be freed from your phone with a Shutterfly photo book. Rediscover and share your favorite moments with those you love. You'll be amazed how easy it is to make a photo book with Shutterfly and enjoy it for years to come. Get 40% off orders over $29 with code POD40 at Shutterfly.com and make something that means something.
This episode is brought to you by Amazon. Sometimes the most painful part of getting sick is the getting better part. Waiting on hold for an appointment, sitting in crowded waiting rooms, standing in line at the pharmacy, that's painful. Amazon One Medical and Amazon Pharmacy remove those painful parts of getting better with things like 24/7 virtual visits and prescriptions delivered to your door. Thanks to Amazon Pharmacy and Amazon One Medical, healthcare just got less painful.
Hello and welcome to a Stripped Media crossover special, Song by Flixwatcher. I'm Helen Sadler.
I'm Kobe Amanaka.
I'm Sam Pay.
And I'm Martin Zoltz-Olstwick.
And we're about to watch Seven Psychopaths, directed by Martin McDonagh.
Zach? Yeah. All right, listen, why don't you just tell me whatever you want to tell me and I'll go make us a coffee. How about that?
Tea.
Huh?
Tea.
Tea. Why not?
Well, I guess it all began back when I was 17. Distantness of time. I was a little wet behind the ears back then. I don't mind admitting it. But I was burglarizing a house of this judge down in Delacroix, and let me tell you something, don't never burglarize a house of no judge down in Delacroix. So when I went down into his basement, you know what I found down there?
Thanks as always to the Mighty People for their mighty, mighty tunes.
This is a crossover between two podcasts from the Stripped Media Network. So if you enjoy any part of either show, make sure to write a review and rate both Song by Song and Flixwatcher on Apple Podcasts and wherever you get podcasts.
You can join the conversation on Twitter at FlixWatcherPod and at SongBySongPod.
Or on Instagram at Flixwatcher and by visiting the website songbysongpodcast.com.
So whether you're a Flixwatcher listener or a Song by Song listener, either way, this is going to be a little bit unusual. So let's introduce ourselves.
My name's Sam Pay. I'm one of the co-hosts of the Song by Song podcast. I'm an actor-musician based in South London. I was a film student for a long time before I went into the other side of the camera and the stage, as it were. And yeah, we've been doing Song by Song for the last 5 odd years, working through the music of Tom Waits.
So I'm Kobe, and I'm one of the co-hosts of Flixwatcher podcast alongside Helen, who will introduce herself shortly. And we've been doing Flixwatcher coming up to just over 3 years now. We've done 150 episodes, and basically, guys, if you have Netflix and have ever struggled to think about what you should watch on Netflix, then we are the podcast for you.
This feels a little bit like an AA meeting. I'm Martin Zoltz-Olstwick, and I am 13 hours Tom Waits free, but that's about to change because we're going to be listening to Tom Waits.
Hi, Martin.
I've been making Song by Song with Sam for, as he says, nearly 5 years. I make other podcasts as well. You might have heard my music on The Illusionist or episodes of 20,000 Hertz. The theme music to the podcast 90 Minutes Less Film Festival, another Stripped Media Network show, was written by me.
And also, you guys did the theme tune for the Wire Stripped as well.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah,
we should say we didn't write the theme song for the Wire Stripped.
That's important. Tuba by, yes.
And yes, and I am Helen, and Kobe's kind of said everything about Flixwatcher, and I really like cats.
So, we usually talk about a very specific topic on Song by Song, namely the music and film work of Tom Waits, exactly. And now, as I understand it, Flixwatcher, your guests usually choose a film from Netflix and then you have a conversation about it. But in this case, circumstances have made the choice for us, as there is only one Tom Waits film currently on Netflix. So, for our discussion
2, but we've already done one of them already.
Oh, yes,
so...
of course, yes. Well, so we're not doing then The Ballad of Buster Scruggs. And
this is a shame because it's a bloody great film.
Well, Song by Song listeners, we will get to it at some stage, give our take on it. You could nip over to Flixwatcher and get their impression. But for our conversation today, we went with the only option available to us, Seven Psychopaths by Martin McDonagh. Would anyone like to... Usually it's your guests who give the synopsis on Flixwatcher, isn't that right? Would one of you guys care to take a swing at synopsizing?
Oof. I haven't prepared for this. I can have a go, and if it sounds rubbish, then Martin will
chip
edit
in.
it out. Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, chip in. Exactly. Normally we give people a time frame for the synopsis, but we're a bit more loose here. So the Seven Psychopaths tells the story of nominally 7 psychopaths set in within the kind of constraint of a film being made. So Colin Farrell is a film writer, a script writer, and he's surrounded himself by a few friends, one of which is Sam Rockwell. I apologise, I do not know any of the character names.
We've got Colin Farrell playing Marty.
Yep.
And
an obvious analog for Martin McDonagh, the scriptwriter and director of the film.
Marty Farrandon, I think, is the name that he gives himself. And then Sam Rockwell is playing Billy, his actor friend.
And Marty is an alcoholic and struggling to get a film idea together, and his friend, played by Sam, is trying to give him tips by suggesting psychopaths that he could write his film around. And lo and behold, he's one of the worst psychopaths of them all. And the film
This will contain spoilers, we should say.
Yeah, we will contain spoilers. And it's kind of a meta story, isn't it? Because the film's actually kind of playing out as Sam and Marty are kind of talking about it. It's kind of a weird construct for a film, isn't it?
Mm.
Yeah, and somewhere in there as well, there's the case of a stolen dog.
Yes.
Yeah, it's very, very dog-centric. One of the psychopaths, played by Woody Harrelson. Charles.
Oh no, he's not one of the psychopaths.
Yeah, he's psychopath number 3.
Oh, he is. Okay.
He
just seemed like a mob, but I didn't think he was a psychopath. Anyway,
Sam, I knew you'd list the psychopaths.
Oh yeah. Don't worry, I've got a whole spreadsheet here. Yeah, he's a Woody Harrelson character. Charlie has lost his dog, or rather, his dog has been kidnapped, and an awful lot of the plot seems to revolve around where this dog is, who has the dog, Charlie trying to get the dog back. It's very canine centric.
Of course, Sam Rockwell's character, Billy Bickle, has kidnapped the dog, and we initially think that's because he's part of this scam where he and Christopher Walken kidnap dogs and then get the reward money.
Yeah.
But it later transpires that Billy Bickle is sleeping with the mob boss's partner, wife, girlfriend, and has done it deliberately. He stole the dog deliberately to piss off Woody Harrelson, which seems like a bit of a dick move.
I think a fair few things that Sam's character does in this film can be categorised, can be summed up as a bit of a dick move.
Yeah, 6 psychopaths and 1 arsehole, I think is really the...
Well, it's also misleading, isn't it? Because there are 7 psychopaths, but it points out that psychopath number 7 is the same as psychopath number 1, because we see...
You feel shortchanged.
In the first reel, don't we, being the Jack of Diamonds, and then later it's like, oh, it's the same way that we saw earlier on.
Yeah.
You do feel a little bit cheated.
Yeah, where's my 7th psychopath?
Well, I mean, very much so.
Needs.
I think we are meant to assume that the 7th psychopath is possibly the main character, Colin Farrell's character Marty. Surely that's the.
Well, is Christopher Walken's character listed amongst the psychopaths?
No, he is not. Oh no, he is. I'm sorry. No, because he is the Quaker psychopath that we see.
Yes.
Number 2, the Quaker psychopath, as played by Harry Dean Stanton in
Harry Dean
Fantasy. But
this
actually,
cast is stacked, isn't it? So many fantastic actors and performances in this film.
There are.
I think that's something I can say positively about this movie.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they have all these people who don't play that bigger roles, and obviously this is one of the reasons we're here, because Tom Waits is one of these roles in this film. He's not a named. One of the headlining actors, but he's Tom Waits and he's in this film, and he plays quite a cool role, actually.
I didn't remember his role in this film at all. I'd seen this film like you once before, and I had no recollection of his role.
I did not.
But it's surprising because it's a very memorable character and performance. He's this psychopath who appears with a little kind of cradling a bunny rabbit. And we hear his backstory, which is that he's gone on a killing spree to kill serial killers.
It's very original.
I mean, the way that story's told, so beautifully told, and the way he finds his partner in crime and rescues her from this abusive judge in the South. and the rabbit belonged to the Zodiac killer.
Yeah.
They killed the Zodiac killer, and he got upset that his partner in crime and love love of his life was going to hurt the rabbits in burning down the Zodiac killer's house.
It's a very weird sequence. Like, obviously, when Tom Waits arrives, like, I for professional reasons, but also for personal reasons, I get excited and I tune in. And him sitting in that living room telling the story, I totally agree, is very beautiful and draws you in. And I think the film is then trying to play with your attention and your emotions by then delivering sort of a mostly silent, or at least unscored by music but with no dialogue, depiction of Zacharias, played by Tom Waits, and his love Maggie, as played by Amanda Warren, doing the most horrific, visceral, explicit murders of various different psychopaths throughout, the following 40 years odd. And it's really disgusting. Like, I was totally repulsed by that sequence.
It's horrible. It's really
very
horrible.
Inventive, though.
I love the way Amanda Warren's character just comes out when they face the Zodiac killer, just jumps out of the car with a machete and a gun and just screams him into the house. And I just thought, that's great. I like that. This, I mean, you talked about violence. It does not hold back at all. This must be an 18. I
think so,
for the language and
no, I think it's a PG.
That was a 15.
No, it's
really.
Yeah.
Wow. It's incredibly violent, and I find the violence in this pretty unpleasant generally. I think there's a really interesting thing that I've started to notice in these sorts of films, which is the way it sets up who we do violence to, and that we feel okay about what happens to the Zodiac killer because we know that he's a cruel murderer. And so, and the terrible things that happen to him as a result of Maggie and Zachariah, you're not necessarily meant to think that's horrible. You maybe not meant to feel ambiguous about it. And it's interesting that I was trying to work out in the very early part of the film, Colin Farrell and Sam Rockwell go to the cinema, and I was like, what movie are they watching? That looks like a big Takeshi film. And it's Violent Cop. Takeshi Kitano's directorial debut, which is about a cop who is kind of tracking down his quarries through violent methods, which is interesting. It has another kind of commentary on the film of like, who is it okay to do violence to? Who is it okay to set on fire? It's never an accident when someone puts a film in their film, and and that must be some comment on saying like, this is the sort of film I would like to make, something that is violent and explosive and involves punching people in the face, but is considered art.
This, I mean, you talk about the violence is acted on. I guess we see the most tragic victim of the violence was Hans's wife Myra.
Yes,
that's an incredible scene. I think that might be the best scene in the film.
Yeah, it's so tense because I couldn't remember what her name was, and you can see Woody Harrelson kind of unraveling. It's like, oh, okay, so you're the wife. Obviously, said in less kind terms.
Sure. Yeah.
But then it's just, the way she holds herself, I thought she's brilliant. I love to see. I haven't seen her in other. I don't know the actor's name.
Linda Bright Clay is the actor's name. She is fantastic.
But that was such a tight scene. I thought
it's so great. I mean, it really reminds me of that scene in the big partway through True Romance,
right?
Where and I forgot who plays who. So this is going to be embarrassing. Is it Dennis Hopper being menaced by Christopher Walken, or the other way around? It's the mob boss trying to...
Yeah, Dennis Hopper's his father, and Christopher Walken's is the mob boss, is the mob guy.
Right.
Yeah.
So Christopher Walken's trying to get information from Dennis Hopper about the whereabouts of his son, and Dennis Hopper essentially goads him into such anger, Christopher Walken into such anger, that he shoots Dennis Hopper and kills him before he can give away any information. And it really reminded me of that kind of quiet tension. The characters are kind of facing off against each other. There's a battle of wills. Although with this, there's this wonderful section at the beginning where Woody Harrelson, who isn't particularly especially bright character, hasn't worked out what's going on, and he's just kind of doing weird wheelies in the wheelchair around the room. It's this very kind of weird playful energy, but all the time you know that Myra knows who he is and what's going to happen, and that she's in immediate danger, and you know, is she going to get out of it? She doesn't know. And when she realizes that he's dangerous, she doesn't flinch from that danger. She again goads him into, you know, killing her essentially. And it's a very powerful scene. And it's a scene that's echoed a little bit later, less convincingly, by Colin Farrell when he says that, I don't care that I don't have a gun. I'm not. He's not afraid of this big guy with a gun just because he's got a gun. I
think the way that the scene you were mentioning worked so well is that basically Myra is the person who's kind of accepted their death. Yeah. She's kind of, you feel that she's been quite close to it before and is kind of sort of clinging on, and sort of in her expression she almost kind of makes peace with everything before he blows her brains out. So it's a very high contrast between what happens next, which is kind of what Martin McDonagh does a lot in his films, in other films as well, like in Bruges. There's a lot of those contrasts of those kind of very beautiful reflective moments and then complete carnage or insanity.
How did you guys feel about the extreme contrast in this film? Because it is effectively a film that is split down the middle and spends a significant amount of time talking about that split and talking about the kind of film that it wants to be, or that the Marty character, director, writer wants to make.
When I first watched this, I came out of the cinema kind of like dancing around thinking, that was so fun, I really enjoyed that. But I think this time I found it a bit harder, a bit more bitter pill to swallow, because it was I think you said, like, the thing that's thinking it's all over the place, and I love Sam Rockwell, but I just thought I just couldn't get his character really. I didn't understand. Obviously he's a psychopath, but then the word psychopath has been thrown around so loosely in this film. It doesn't actually. Yeah. What psychopaths don't all go out and kill people for shits and giggles, which is what it sounds like in this film.
Also, psychopaths don't have empathy, and it sounds like Tom Waits' character, just to pick one of them. Like he does have empathy. He's a very empathetic character. Like Sam Rockwell, you might argue is a psychopath. I don't think that. Woody Harrelson's character is a psychopath. I think it's just his job. Like, if he was a gangster who didn't shoot people, he wouldn't be very good at his job. He has to intimidate people and he has to use violence because that's his industry.
And Hans Christopher Walken is not a psychopath. He's exacting revenge on the loss of their daughter. So I found it harder to take this time round. There's some set pieces, and Martin McDonagh and his brother have a way with words which works well on the screen. But I think it just didn't. It was just a bit silly. Sometimes it just didn't kind of hang together in the way I think he wanted it to.
It's interesting that you're like that, because I'm the opposite way around, because I saw it at the cinema and came out of it and I hated it. I thought it was terrible. And when you suggested that we watch this, in my head I had a completely different film about what this film actually was. So I was watching it going, this isn't what I remembered it. And I actually got a lot more out of it this way round. But I think the key bit is that you mention it. I think the first time round, one of the reasons that I hated it so much is that all of the women in it were awful. Yeah. But then they're awfully written in it because they've been written by a man. Yeah. And that's kind of a comment. So I got that more on this time round, and having rewatched In Bruges as well, I didn't like that the first time round, but having since rewatched it, got a lot more love for it. I don't know whether I've just kind of got used to him a bit more, his style of filmmaking.
He even comments later on when they're in the desert, when they're commenting on Marty, big scare quotes, his script, and they're like, these women characters are terrible, and he's like, women it's a hard world for women, and Christopher Walken says something like, but most of the ones I know can string a sentence together. Yeah, exactly. Which I just thought was good. But and I was watching with my wife, and she was like, but that's still not an excuse for not writing good women characters. Like, you can't just comment on it and be like, it's a thing I do, I'm shit at writing women. It's like, no. And Myra is a good woman, and I think Myra is a good woman character, but she gets killed really quick.
I think that this is how I felt about an awful lot of the character of Marty. That while I think that actually the performance by Colin Farrell is really good, I always like Colin Farrell when he's using an Irish accent. I think that's my defining feature.
100%.
Yeah, but but it did feel like it was giving Martin McDonagh, one, a very cool presentation of himself on screen, and two, it felt like he was like giving himself a pass by pointing to all of his flaws, but not necessarily changing any of his habits in the film. Like, it's having his cake and eating it.
Yeah.
Saying, I want to make a much more introspective, just a bunch of people talking to each other in the desert. But that's not what the film rests on fundamentally, is it?
But also, they don't even do that. Like, they don't really talk about anything. They talk about how there's going to be this big shootout.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
how ridiculous it is that Sam Rockwell's written this big shootout. And then there is it's actually the real shootout, I guess, is referring to the ridiculousness of the stereotypes shootout and making it a little bit more interesting and funny and weird. And, you know, when the guy with the shotgun is just like, I'm not shooting that guy over a dog. Don't be ridiculous. You know, and that's something that both McDonald's do. They do deconstruct stuff. But to me, the whole film, it felt like an older film. Like, it felt like it wanted to be a Tarantino film. Yes. I felt like in the mid-90s, there were so many of those films that were postmodern, self-referential, had characters that would talk about what the burgers were like in France, you know, liberally throw around like sexist and racist language, which obviously Tarantino loves to use. But this is 10 years later. Like, why did Martin... Like, I think In Bruges is a much better film. Like, I don't know why Martin McDonagh took on these tropes that are like old and dated at the point that he made this movie.
I agree with you. I think he could have done a similar kind of story in film, but just a more nuanced, and it wouldn't have detracted away from anything. He could have shot it the same way, could have had the same actors. Some of the language was just off-putting for me at some points, and that point when I loved how Christopher Walken's hands called him out on the script, and I think within the meta nature of the film, it could have almost written like, oh yeah, from now on, women in this film will have an interesting storyline.
Right. They could have acted upon it.
Yeah, they could have, exactly.
I mean, it's just like, it's such a cliche for like a second film from a screenwriter / director to be about how you can't write a second film. And it reminded me a little bit of Adaptation.
Very much so.
Which arguably is a better film because just because it did it first. The weird thing about this film is that I think it's like, it's directed really well. The cast is great. The direction is great. It looks great. It's exciting. The pacing, the editing. It's just like, it's let down by the source material, which is weird when it's the same person writing and directing the bloody thing.
It does feel a bit like a pastiche of a lot of films that you've already mentioned, and that it's kind of taking bits from Tarantino, from True Romance, from
Scorsese,
wherever, and just kind of like mixing it all together in one way. It's sort of this kind of half homage to Hollywood, and then the other way it's kind of like this funny thing about, is a psychopath kind of thing, with like a bit of sort of bizarre humour thrown in just for good measure.
I do remember laughing about when in what's Sam Rockwell's character called again?
Billy
Bickle, presumably after Travis Bickle, because there's that wonderful taxi driver scene early on where he's like talking into the mirror. It's like, well, I didn't quite hear you. Oh yeah, sorry, yeah, Jeff.
Is it the bit where he keeps his boots on?
No, Billy's rendition of the shootout that would happen in the graveyard, and the head explodes, and then you cut to Hans and Marty like. But seriously though, head doesn't explode.
Is that possible? Maybe if it was made of explosives.
Yeah.
one of my favourite moments in the entire film was cutting to Christopher Walken. I assume, you know, an outtake or something between shots where he's just pissing himself laughing while Sam Rockwell. I genuinely think as well though, and it is worth saying, it is a pretty film. It's visually exciting.
Joshua Tree looks amazing. I would recommend.
Superb.
Going there.
And I think it's got some great performances. I think that Sam Rockwell monologue is totally up there as an incredible moment in, like, you know, postmodern cinema. Maybe not an innovative one, but it's incredibly well executed, and Rockwell's performance as ever is brilliant. I really like Tom Waits telling the story before we go off into the fantasy sequence, and I really like the three of them in the car, Christopher Walken, Colin Farrell and Sam Rockwell, that conversation that they're having about not the first time they introduced not having a shootout and going off into the desert. I've talked about this a bunch in the films we've been watching over the last few weeks. I really like spending time with these characters, and then I come back to the plot, the meat, the events of the film, and I go, oh, that's a slightly disappointing.
Well, it's just unsatisfying if the plot of a film is how do we make a commentary on violence which is ultimately spiritually satisfying, and the film spends so long doing that and parodying that idea, like, oh, can you have this monk, be a religious guy, and whatever, and it doesn't ultimately succeed that well. Like, even the idea that there's this character, the psychopath monk, and the twist is that it's all a moment of flashback, kind of Jacob's Ladder style thing, and actually they're immolating themselves in protest for the Vietnam War, and it's sort of just like, I don't know, like, you can't draw upon that kind of really. It just made me think about by thinking about how much weight that act had in the real world.
Yes.
It just made me think about how flimsy the film was.
Absolutely.
I think we've recorded Reservoir Dogs. I'm not sure whether it'll be released before this comes out. And that was a lot of what Madonna's trying to do here. Like, those conversations, my favourite parts of Reservoir Dogs are the conversations between Harvey Keitel and Tim Roth and the other characters and
Steve Buscemi,
Yeah, and it's so tight how Tarantino does it. And the film still looks great, Reservoir Dogs, and it still works well. And you almost forget, there are like scenes of violence in Reservoir Dogs that you can't, they're hard to ignore, but they're not actually that potent. They're not as explicit as they are in here. You see,
really interesting. Because I remember the scenes. I remember the famous scene in Reservoir Dogs, the Steelers wheel scene, stuck in the middle with you. Like, I've seen that film a couple of times, not for a long time, but finding that scene so intensely difficult to watch. And because of the menace in it, not necessarily because of the actual act of violence, but the kind of cruelty and the control that's happening between the characters. It's a lot.
But then at that point, as I say in the recording, I'm not going to give away what happens, but I heard about that scene and I was scared as a kid to watch it because I was just like, I don't want to see that. But when you actually see the scene, the way they actually shoot it it's the intensity is like in the way that it's built up and the way it plays out. You don't actually see it so viscerally.
Not in the gore. It's the build up to it.
And I just think Tarantino at his best does dialogue well. Both of Madonna's do dialogue really well, but I think him in Bruges, there's sparing violence and there's sparing language, and the story works out really well. And I think the framework of this film just isn't quite there.
I think there's this thing of, for me, like, I think you have to construct something to deconstruct something. So, like, in Bruges and the other, I think things like The Guard, which his brother made,
and The Cavalry.
Which I haven't seen. Yeah, but they have a lot of deconstructive humour where the drug dealers are kind of remarking on the trope. Like, there's a scene in this in Seven Psychopaths where he says, "Why would you check the gun is loaded when you loaded it yourself?" Little things like that where they're kind of deconstructing the cliches of mob films. But there's something to deconstruct in this. If the story is, how do I finish this script? That's not a story. That's a script writing problem. No. Whereas in Bruges has such a compelling and interesting central story dealing with like guilt and redemption and the kind of some of the themes that come in this film of like, do you believe in heaven and hell and kind of eternal justice? Like.
Well, he explores that going in the other direction. 3 billboards outside Ebbings, Missouri, builds the moments of sudden and disturbing and frightening violence on a much more stable and quiet and emotionally satisfying drama. And here it doesn't feel like, one, it's a good enough idea for a drama, or it doesn't commit, it doesn't spend enough time building that drama. So you're somewhere between these two ideas, as opposed to, like you say, Martin, springboarding off it into something that shocks and attacks and arrests you as a viewer.
I think you're right.
I think part of it is that you'll find it with quite a lot of films, is where filmmakers try and make films about Hollywood that they end up feeling quite empty and unsatisfying, and it kind of feels that they're just trying to do something, and it's almost like a comment about how Hollywood is so empty and unsatisfying, but then they make a film that is so Hollywood that it is so empty and unsatisfying, and it just feels like, well, what was the point of that?
Tell them about La La Land, Helen.
So I hate La La Land. I think it's awful. And that's a film that makes a comment about Hollywood and...
Right. It's a film that's trying to show you how wonderful Hollywood is, but...
it isn't. And I don't know, it feels that had it not had this whole kind of... Say, for example, had he been writing a book rather than a screenplay, then it might have been slightly different, and that the focus might have been on making these characters written better rather than thinking about how they would feel in a film, in a screenplay. And I think that part of the problem is because he's writing a screenplay, and it is this part comment on Hollywood and Hollywood violence and that.
It's very shallow commentary on that. Like, it doesn't dig in at all, does it?
I don't think it tries. I mean, like I say, I think what happens when you start nitpicking a film, it means that there's just a seed of it that you don't really congeal, you don't really mesh with. And I think for me, like picking at the word psychopath and the use of it means that there's something with this film which I fundamentally didn't gel with, even though
I think some films you forgive a lot, and I feel this is a film that has a lot of good things about it, but ultimately they're slightly surface detail, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly. And
I want to forgive it for the three central performances, but and I had a similar experience to Helen, where my memory of this was of massive disappointment off the back of In Bruges, and going back to it this time, I found more to like, and I had a really nice time, and I think particularly Christopher Walken's character occupies the kind of space that he's rarely allowed to live in. An extreme, a very unpredictable character, and crazily mannered, as Walken always is. But he never looks like he's pushing, he never looks like he's trying too hard. Lots of acting, but he looks very friendly and relaxed and warm. I had a lovely time listening to him.
He's such an exceptional screen presence. I mean, amazing. Other actors that do that thing of they turn up and they do the thing they do and it's weird and unpredictable, like Jack Nicholson, I find him very boring to watch. Whereas Christopher Walken, he's incredibly charismatic.
Yeah,
to me.
There are a few scenes in this, like when he sits opposite Woody Harrelson's character.
I was just looking at him,
and just looking at him, and then there's a face off where he gets shot at the end, and he's like, have you got a gun? No, and all that kind of. I just say raise your hands, and it's like no, It's just nonchalantly. You know what, mate? My wife's dead. I can't be bothered. My friends are dicks.
But also that kind of thing of like, just because you've got a gun doesn't mean I do what you say. I mean, you heard that from Murray, you hear that from him, you hear that from Marty later, where he's like, "Don't you wish you had a gun?" No, I don't wish I had a gun. And that's the one way I think, and there's any kind of engagement with the idea of like having a gun doesn't make you the best or the most powerful or will get you what you want in life. There is a kind of path of peace. And maybe that was designed to be there to contrast with the very heavy-handed, like, isn't that what Gandhi said? Kind of, narrative going
on. So what do we reckon of Sam Rockwell in this, and where does this rank in your kind of Sam Rockwell performances? Because I wasn't really aware of him. I hadn't seen Moon when this had come out. But every time I have seen him, it's someone that gets me excited because he can pull these things out of the bag. And
he's a really funny, energetic actor, but I don't know, like, does he have a lot of range? I mean, Moon is pretty different, but you think about this and like Galaxy Quest, and he often plays these big assholes.
Showy characters.
3 Billboards Outside of Ebbing, Missouri is a demonstration of his range for me.
Okay. Oh, I haven't seen that.
It's really good.
I'm a huge Sam Rockwell fan, and I've seen quite a lot of his films, sort of starting with like Lawn Dogs.
Oh, yes, he's in Lawn Dogs. Lawn Dogs is great. I forgot about that.
And he's also in The Green Mile as well. Who else is he in there?
He just tends to
take it back. He's got range.
Confessions of a Dangerous Mind is one of my favourites as well. I really, 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 really loved him in that. I thought he was great.
And that's another film about, like, the shortcomings of entertainment and television that does succeed in deconstructing it, as well as delivering and explaining the shortcomings of it as well.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a lot warmer film than this one, and yeah, I like that. Nowhere near the violence, but I mean, I like Sam Rockwell. I think more recently he kind of has maybe played it a little bit OTT, but then maybe that's just the characters that he's been given.
This would tie with all other Sam Rockwell performances as the best Sam Rockwell performance for me. I'm huge.
I like his slightly more restrained ones. I think he slightly struggles with the material here. Like, I think if he's doing a big character, it suits the material, but the character's not very deeply written. Really, he's just someone who likes to cause mischief.
How about your opinion of everyone's opinion of Tom Waits in comparison to other Tom Waits performances.
I was going to say this is what's brought us here. I forgot that Tom Waits was in this film before you guys suggested it, and
yeah, so did I.
I thought, I remember an older guy. I thought it was Christopher Walken though. So it was quite surprising when he came in. And I rarely seen him in films, but I really loved him in Buster Scruggs. I know we talk about that. And I think it's a bit as a portmanteau film for Buster Scruggs. Everyone's got a different vignette, but his I think was the best one. But apart from him in this, and also Imaginarium and Dr. Parnassus, I can't really think of when I've seen him in film. So I defer to you guys.
First introduction to Tom Waits for me was not his music, it was his acting in Bram Stoker's Dracula. So
Fresh Lives of the Master.
And I do love him in that. And then also Jim Jarmusch's films, that's where I kind of know him as well. So I enjoyed him with this. And even though I didn't like The Ballad of Buster Scruggs at all, I think I liked him in it.
I mean, I would, not to jump ahead, but I would say that I think his performance in Buster Scruggs is my favourite Tom Waits performance. I think it's really exceptionally deft and funny. And he owns that vignette, doesn't he? I think.
Yes.
There's two moments I really like in Tom Waits moments I really like in Seven Psychopaths. The first one is when he starts telling the story, and by the end of the story that he's talking about travelling around the country killing serial killers. But it begins with, well, I was hanging around in this town in the south, and was it Macon? No, it must have, that kind of like old man way of telling a story. Yeah. You're just like, is this just some guy wasting his time? And like Colin Farrell's in the kitchen making a cup of tea or a cup of coffee. Oh, tea, he's making tea, isn't he? And then at some point in the conversation, you see Colin Farrell's character kind of tune back in and go, what did he just say? It's a really nice way into the story. And the other one is the bit in the mid-credits scene where Colin Farrell's character Marty has promised to have a dedication or a shout out to Maggie to call Zachariah. By the way, is Zach, is that the same character as his character in Down by Law?
Of course, yeah.
So Marty promises to write as a recompense for Tom Waits' character Zachariah telling his story. Marty says, "I'll write a thing into the film so that Maggie, with your phone number, so Maggie can call you," and he doesn't. And so you see this end of sort of credit scene of Tom Waits, Zachariah phoning up Marty and being like, I didn't see my name in the credits. and what I love about that scene is that the way that they both speak is so weird. Like Tom Waits has got such a weird way of breathing, so you'll have these long breaths, and then like Colin Farrell's broken. He's just like, yeah, Tuesday's good.
He's
like
barely speaking.
Neither of them are like opening their mouths. It's just such a funny scene, and so much like goes on within that scene. The dynamics of it are fantastic. I think it's one of the better scenes of the film, and it's just this little like extra in the credits.
There's a really nice story. I'll include it as a link in the show notes for the song-by-song edition of this. There's a really nice little fragment of an interview where Colin Farrell is talking about the time he got to spend with Tom Waits and what a cool guy and what a fantastic time they had, even though they had these two scenes. And apparently Waits was on set when props came over with a variety of pens, because, obviously Marty is a writer, and so they were, trying to make a selection for what kind of pen he should be writing his notes with. And apparently Waits came up behind him and peered over his shoulder and said, "Oh yeah, be careful which one you choose. They all have stories inside them. Some have novels and some have short stories. They're powerful objects."
I genuinely I love that, actually. I think that's really cool. That's a really nice way to think about them, isn't it?
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. It's also quite a passable impression, Sam.
Thanks. I'm doing my level best.
As always, we score a film on Flixwatcher using our patented Flixwatcher scoring system.
We make so much money from that patent.
We have a spreadsheet. It's all glorious. It's very wonderful. I guess we will start with...
Imagine what's possible when learning doesn't get in the way of life. At Capella University, our game-changing FlexPath learning format lets you set your own deadlines so you can learn at a time and pace that works for you. It's an education you can tailor to your schedule. That means you don't have to put your life on hold to pursue your professional goals. Instead, enjoy learning your way and earn your degree without missing a beat. A different future is closer than you think with Capella University. Learn more at capella.edu.
Sam, we'll start with you. So we all the scores are out of 5. You may have decimal places if you wish.
Thank you.
And the first of our scoring is the recommendability. So out of 5, how much would you recommend this film?
I think I'd give it a solid 3.5. I think it's got enough to recommend it in performances and in some of the funny little detours that it goes off on, particularly Rockwell's monologue over the ridiculous fantasy shootout to say that people enjoy it. I think it is also disappointing and has enough full-on excessive violence for me to give a few caveats. So 3.5.
Martin?
I would give it a resounding 2. Only because if you're a big fan of like Christopher Walken or Tom Waits or Sam Rockwell or Colin Farrell or Martin McDonagh, you should probably watch it. But if you're not, I don't think it's a great film. I'd point people towards In Bruges or The Guard over this one.
Helen?
So I'm going to go a bit higher than Martin, but sort of in the same area as Sam. So I'm going to go 3.7. I think it's kind of a hard sell anyway, this film, and you have to kind of take a lot of things on board to kind of watch it, and sort of re-allude to repeat viewing that I think in one go, and having come to it cold, you'd be like, what is this? You'll either be like, this is the best film ever, I've never seen anything like this before, it's my favourite film.
If you've never seen a Tarantino film, sure.
Exactly. That if you've never seen Tarantino and you've never seen any of Martin McDonagh's films before, then this would probably be your favourite film. That said, it's not for everyone, and I don't think it's as clever a film as it thinks it is. And what we've already talked about, what makes it really are the kind of the performances and this kind of strange camaraderie that exists between the main characters.
Lallerton's strange camaraderie. So 3.7.
Yeah. Rather than it kind of having sort of a zippier screenplay that it thinks it has.
I'm going to go for a 4 here. I think it's quite easy. There will be caveats, but I'll be like, watch it and let me know what you think. But I think some people will really enjoy it, some people won't. And I enjoyed it less the second time. So I think quite a high score for the first one, but I think my following scores will be lower. I
mean, I'm not saying don't watch it. I'm just saying watch a lot of other films that you've been meaning to get around to first.
There's one or two other films, aren't there? There are a few they've made.
Films, put this at the bottom. Is that what you're saying, Martin? If there's a long
just in the middle,
films,
somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, when you like Netflix, when you've watched everything on Netflix, then sure.
Complete Netflix.
The end of the scroll. Okay.
Repeat viewing score, Sam.
I had a better time the second time. I also can't imagine going back to it anytime soon, as people have said. I think there's other films that are stronger to go back to. So with those two things in mind, I'll give it a 3, because I think there are things that emerge on second viewings, but probably not on third.
Martin?
I'm going to stay consistent and give it a solid 2 for rewatchability.
How many times have you seen this, Martin?
This is the second time I've seen it. The first time I saw it, I hated it. And this time I hated it. But with caveats that I did like some of the performances, and I'd forgotten Tom Waits was in it, so that was nice.
Martin's the most consistent element of Song by Song, guys.
I do think that even if you enjoy it, it's not a deep film, and I don't think there's a ton of stuff where you go back and go like, oh, there was that connection that I didn't spot. There's an Easter egg, you know. You might spot that it was Violent Cop, but you could just do that by Googling, you know. So
do you not think that there's dialogue that you notice more, like Woody Harrelson, you know, going, oh, can we go back to 5? Is there no value in seeing that again?
Yeah, those are good scenes, but I enjoyed them well enough the first time.
Okay.
Helen?
I definitely enjoyed this more the second time round, and I remember it coming on Netflix, and I remember looking at it going, people had generally talked about it quite positively, and I'd always gone, it's rubbish, it's shit, and then went, actually, maybe they could be right, and I could be wrong, unlikely, but I should give it a go.
You're not wrong, Helen.
But I did actually enjoyed it a lot more the second time round, but it is an hour and 50 minutes, which I'd not remembered.
Long. It is
very long.
Especially when there's only 6 psychopaths.
Yeah, you expect the 7th.
There's 7. There's 7.
But
the psychopaths were the friends we made along the way.
Maybe it's a reflection on the viewer.
The 7th one is yourself. That's the thing.
Exactly.
Only a psychopath would watch this film twice.
Psychopaths is sled. The 7th one's the sled. Helen, what's your repeat viewing score?
Yeah, I mean, if someone said, like, I've not seen it, do you want to watch it with me? I'd probably say yes. So I'd go with Sam. I'm going to go for 3 on this one. I'm not going to rush out and see it, but it didn't pain me to watch it the second time as much as it did the first time.
Hearty endorsement.
Put it on the poster.
I'm going for 1.5 here. Enjoyed it a lot at the cinema, a lot less so this time round. I can't see myself rushing out to watch it. Maybe like in the scenario that Helen painted, that if someone was saying, "Do you want to watch it?" I'd say, "Yeah, I'll watch it with you."
Do you think that's because it's dated, Kobe? Is that just because you've seen it twice, or is it because it's 12? How many years on?
8 years.
I think if I'd have said without rewatching this and I was asked to give a repeat viewing score, it would have been a lot higher. I just can't think of the things I'd take out of it again. The bits I really enjoyed the first time were exactly the same. Yeah. And the bits I thought were passable were just worse. So I loved, there's some of the stories of the psychopaths were like, Harry Dean Stanton. That side of things, I thought that was really cool where that was played out.
And Harry Dean Stanton.
And that was played out to be, Christopher Walken. And the storyline between Tom Waits and his wife, his lover wife, I thought,
Zach and Maggie.
Yeah, Maggie. So those kind of how those kind of bits played out were really cool. But I think now I've seen them again, I'm like, I'm not sure if I can really be bothered. Ultimately, maybe once every 8 or 9 years. That kind of maybe that's how that transpires out to. Yeah. Small screen score, Sam.
I think that it's fine on a small screen. I think more and more, particularly because I'm watching more and more things on small screens, particularly films like this, where I go, oh, this will be fun, this will be action-packed, this will have some smart dialogue, but ultimately won't be something that I need to invest myself in emotionally. I think it's totally okay. As long as you've got headphones with your small screen, or you've got the ability to turn the TV up a little bit, I have no problem saying that this is a 4, it doesn't need a cinema.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, actually, the things that I do like about this film, I think it looks great, and the rhythm of it is great, and the sets and the lighting, all of that stuff, like the locations, all the stuff in Joshua Tree, I love. So actually, I would say, like, watch it on the biggest screen as possible. I watched it on a 32-inch screen in Airbnb, which 10 years ago I would have said felt like a really big screen, but now feels quite small. So I would have liked a bigger screen. If Flixwatcher listeners want to make that happen for me, I can send you the address. So I'll give it a 4 as well, yeah.
Helen?
Is that going to go on your Airbnb rating, though, when you review the property?
Tiny screen. Too small for 7 psychopaths.
So I saw this at the cinema, and not even seeing it at the cinema at that time would give me any kind of pleasure in my memory of it. But rewatching it, I think you're right, Martin. The way it's filmed is obviously, there's been a lot of love and care taken into it, and there is some very beautiful scenery in there. But that said, I think it's perfectly fine to watch at home. So I'm going to give it a 4.5.
I'm going to go for a 4. Join you guys on the 4 party. It was quite. I think I really enjoyed it in cinema, but I was thinking about the scenery. I just think maybe the colour saturation was kind of what made it a bit more cinematic than a lot of it. But when there's a scene of Christopher Walken walking through the desert with a big kind of wide shot, and Martin talking about how he kind of carries himself, how he moves, that was really things like that were really cool. So it's the unassuming parts of the film which I think make it cinematic rather than, the big showy parts, I thought. Because I think showy scenes have been done really well in things like True Detective on a smaller screen. So, yeah, 4. Engagement score, Sam?
Well, I remained reasonably engaged with this, partly because I'm watching it for a serious professional engagement.
Yeah, we are paying you for this.
Yeah, thanks for the that'll keep me in chocolate buttons for a good few weeks. I found it held my attention really, really fairly well. I think it's frustrating, but I don't think it's badly made at any particular time. I think, like what we said, the source material lets it down, but the performances are all really strong. I did sort of recoil slightly at some of the extreme violence, but I think I don't think we paused it or went to make a cup of tea. So again, a 4. I stayed engaged.
Martin?
Yeah, I have to grudgingly admit that it's pretty engaging. I mean, sections of it are also quite boring and predictable, but yeah, it's a really engaging film. The frustrating thing is that sometimes that engagement feels like it's coming through button pushing, like by going like, oh, we're going to describe this big shootout scene like it's ridiculous, but it's also quite exciting, So it's they kind of have their cake and eat it a lot of the time by this sort of meta thing. So yeah, I'll give it a 4 for engagement. It's an engaging movie.
Helen?
Yes, I'm also going to give it a 4. I started watching this faffing about on my phone, and then it was so engaging that I had to actually put my phone down and watch it and give it my attention.
A shocking indictment of social media culture.
I have to actually watch what was going on. So yeah, a 4.
Yeah, I'm going to go for maybe a bit higher than you guys, 4.5, because I think, I really enjoyed. I wasn't ever bored. And I remember, with films with dialogue more so than action, I think sometimes you need to be dialed in or else you're not getting it. And partly because I'd seen it like 9 years ago, I think like everyone else saw it when it first kind of came out and hadn't seen it since, which is kind of indicative of where we kind of feel with the film. But it pulled me through. And when there were the key scenes like with Myra and Woody Harrelson's character that I had completely forgotten, it just kind of, it did reward like paying attention and being involved in it. Yeah. So I'm going to 4.5.
Where does that leave us then, Kobe?
An overall score of 3.48125.
Yeah, it's pretty decent. 3.5-ish.
Yeah. What's average? What's average? Yeah.
Is that is it an above average film? I mean, I feel like in some ways it's way above average, and in some ways it's way below average. So maybe that's fair.
Yeah, I think that seems to be the problem here. There's conflicting. There's great parts about it, the performances, but then there's always like, oh, really?
It's not dumb enough to be a dumb movie, and it's not smart enough to be a smart movie. So I think you're disappointed regardless of how you approach it.
It's just like wildly inconsistent. It's like you get into this beautiful luxury car, you put on the sound system, it sounds amazing, you recline in your leather seat, you put on the massager, and then you realise the car's got no engine.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to say, then you don't get stuck in traffic in South London. No.
I thought you were going to say about like a Dolby, the Dolby cassette. That's what you're playing from the 1980s.
All you got is Phil Collins.
Yeah, maybe that's a better metaphor. Yeah. Yeah. What you've got is Steely Dan.
As we say, guys, it's 3.48125. Thank you very much to Sam and Martin for joining us again. And that kind of wraps it up from the Flixwatcher side. Sam and Martin, do remind everyone, where can they find you online? Oh, not remind everyone. Can you tell everyone for the first time, if this is the first time you're hearing Song by Song, and we're going to guide everyone from Flixwatcher to your podcast?
Well, that's very kind. Personally, as an individual, I'm at Sam Pay on Twitter. Currently not much going on with my life apart from childcare. I occasionally will tweet PlusNet about my broadband signal. But so if you want to tune in for that, then you can find me there.
Martin?
Well, I'm Martin Austwick on Twitter, which means you have to figure out how to spell my name, and I'm not going to spell it out because that's annoying, and I do that approximately twice a day anyway. So I'm sure Kobe will put a link in the show notes. I make music for The Illusionist, amongst many other shows, and at the moment we're doing episodes called Tranquillusionists, which are designed to calm you and soothe you to sleep if things are feeling a little bit stressful at the moment. So maybe those are nice ones to check out.
As far as the show, Song by Song podcast, we can be found on Twitter at Song by Song Pod, or you can send us an email at songbysongpodcast@gmail.com.
We're also on Facebook at Song by Song Show, and we've got a website which is songbysongpodcast.com. And for our listeners, Helen and Kobe, where can people find you?
You can find Flixwatcher on Twitter at FlixWatcherPod. I am at the Cat Film Fan on Twitter. I mentioned before I do like cats. It is me there, but yes, please do come find us on Twitter for Flixwatcher.
And I am Cobestar, Kobestarr. Just type that into Google and you'll find me on Twitter, Instagram, because no one else wants to use that ridiculous name moniker thing online. So I've got full claim to it. But thank you so much, Sam and Martin, for rejoining us on our show. We should say you guys have joined us before for The Drunken Master and Nice Guys. So if you have enjoyed this conversation, do scroll back through the feed or just type in Nice Guys or Drunken Master. You can hear the guys talking about those films. And Helen and I have also been on Song by Song independently as well. So we are sharing a love with the kind of Stripped Media community. And do listen out for other shows on Stripped Media Network, including 90 Minutes or Less Film Fest or the Why Stripped.
We just did a crossover with 90 Minutes or Less last week, so you can go back in the time and listen to that if you'd like to.
Absolutely.
Talking about the film, slightly in a not a very timely title. It's a film called Risk Cutters, A Love Story. It's a comedy, but you can probably guess that some of the content is dark humour, so maybe avoid that if you're not feeling too cheerful.
Yeah. Too late for 7 Psychopaths.
Yeah.
Yes. And we do actually have another film episode coming up. Next week we have an episode dedicated to the 1992 Francis Ford Coppola film Bram Stoker's Dracula. You have to say it in that voice. And we're going to be joined by Jenny Owen-Youngs from Buffering the Vampire Slayer and Helen Zaltzman from Being My Wife and the Illusionist podcast. And thanks very much for coming on our show again, Kobe and Helen.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Thanks so much for having us.
Absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
Bye.
That's good. I'm not doing anything Tuesday.
You sound different. It's not like you've been through a ringer.
A little.
Tuesday doesn't really work for me. Can I get back to you?
Sure. I'll be right here.
I know. Come on, Carrie. Let's go home, baby.
Flixwatcher
and Song by Song
are both proud members of the Stripped Media Network.